Forward to the Hey, y'all. Welcome back to the Serenity Strong podcast. I'm your host, Shelby Ann. As always, the objective of my podcast is to never tell you how to live your life, it is to give you suggestions, perspectives, experiences that I have been through, a guest I bring on more or less in the realm of fitness, nutrition, health, and now massage therapy. Today we have on Chase Holmer, who works at the gym that I coach at, 1031 Fitness. He runs his athlete academy, so a high school focused program out of our gym, and we've just been meshing back and forth, and I was thinking, why not have him on the podcast? He has a lot of good information. He's been in the game for a really long time, seeing the transition from when he started athletics at a young age, going to school for it, and how he transitioned into helping high school kids, perform better, not only in the gym, but also out of the gym as a mentor. And then how his own fitness has transitioned into where he is now, really diving into the hybrid method training, which I feel like encompasses a lot of things that many people as they age are really looking for, because it's a more like well-rounded approach to your fitness, especially if you like running. So I'm going to give the mic over to Chase so we can get to know him better.
Yeah, so for undergrad, and then I went to grad school at University of Tampa. And purely the only reason I went down there is I was an athlete, obviously growing up, but I graduated high school at 125 pounds. That's what I wrestled my senior year, and I became obsessed with anything that was going to get me bigger and stronger, right? And so when I graduated, I want to be a college professor. Like I just enjoyed educating people, and I really wanted to like help educate people, but also like I was in a very niche, like I, I just cared about building muscle, right? And there's not a lot of funding when it comes to research and that kind of stuff when it comes to building muscle and different modalities to do that. And so I was like looking at schools, and basically um, there's a professor out of University of Tampa at the time who was like big on like the blogs and like different websites. And he basically only cared about like high performance, building muscle strength, which a lot of labs just don't do, right? Especially in terms of physique. And at the time, they happened to be a like probably like top 10 program in the nation in terms of like exercise phys and exercise science. And so I took a chance, like I, I knew no one. Smart on my part, but like I didn't even reach out to the professor before like I applied to the program and got accepted and decided to go down there that see if I could even study in his lab. Um, but basically, long story short, I went down there. Awesome. Like I got in front of like people that I thought I was super intelligent when I went to, you know, down there to get my master's, and I realized quickly that I didn't know anything. Um, uh,
I think that's one of the
so
hardest realizations when
I
you're
realized I
younger.
didn't know.
But I think that's one of the hardest realizations when you're younger is like getting into the field, right? And then you put yourself and you're like, oh, wow, there's like so much more shit to know and like learn out there. You're like, okay, thank you.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That was kind of my thing. Am I still good there?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, that was one of my big things. Was like I um change the scenery up here a little bit. So yes, yeah, so that was like the one thing that was like pretty like eye opening, right? You're like, I don't know anything. I need to go learn. And so basically I went down there, and I got to do some like really cool studies, right? Like I got to see an eye-opening experience of like what the research life is like, what the research life is like. Um, because I think that's something that like a lot of people don't know. Um, they just don't know what that's about. And then so I do that for I knock out my master's program in a year. Like I was going straight through or whatever. And basically halfway through my probably like halfway through three-fourths of my program, I'm like, Yeah, I don't love research. I don't love sitting behind a desk all day. Like
Yeah.
I I love learning, but I also want to be ethical, right? I like to work with people. Like I'm a very social person. You'll probably understand this podcast, be like, holy cow, this dude does not stop talking. Um, but I'm just like a very social person, and I just had missed like athletics, right? I didn't I like swore when I was like in college I was like never gonna be a personal trainer, like that I didn't want to work with like athletes. Like I just didn't care about sports at that time, and I didn't honestly care about like working with people individually. Like I just more so like I I just sounds weird, but like I thought college was like way too easy, and I thought they like taught stuff that like wasn't really applicable to the real world, right? And so that just
Mm-hmm.
something that like stuck with me, and so I thought that like that was kind of my route that I wanted to go in terms of like how I could help people and just like get them ready for the real world. But I realized that coming along with being a professor, a lot of times comes research, and that wasn't really what I was about. And so
Right.
I have I like halfway through like I talked to one of my professors or who was kind of my boss at the time and who was doing research, and I was like, hey, I like really just like miss the sport of wrestling. Like I was wondering if this is something like I can just help out with, right? Like, and I was by no means like a superstar wrestler, but I just had good coaches, and I felt like I had something to offer, especially like down in Florida where wrestling is not that big.
No.
Um and so I talked to my professor, and I like am trying to find somewhere to go and coach. Well, fast forward, I start coaching. I think it's like legitimately like the greatest thing in the world, right? I'm making probably like I think if it break down to it, like I was making like 250 or $3 an hour for my time, right? Like of this coaching or whatever. But like I didn't care. Like it was the
Yeah.
most fun I'd had in a long, most fun I had in a long time, and I didn't care that I like came straight from work and then had to come coach because it was just so fun. And I was at a very well-to-do, well-off high school in Tampa, Florida. And as the season goes on, like I'm thinking about the off season, I'm just like becoming obsessed with like, okay, how can I get these kids to be as good as possible, right? Like I just became obsessed with like I'll like never forget like after the first day of practice, like I literally hop on like ResearchGate, Google Scholar. I've been doing all this research, and I look up like every possible study on like wrestling strength conditioning and sports performance. And so then like I just quickly realized like I became obsessed with the process of helping people to like get the most out of their goals, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so fat and fast forward, like I realized it wasn't like the wrestling side that I necessarily like. I did enjoy that, but it was more like the strength and conditioning side, right? And
Yeah.
so the season ends, and I'm I'm like figuring out all their figuring out what the schedule is going to be. I'm going to figure out the perfect program, all this, and I'm like, there's like nowhere, like this is a really good high school, and like football, basketball, like everything was really good, and except for wrestling at the time. And I was like, how do they not have a strength conditioning program? And basically, fast forward, and I do some thinking, I run some numbers, and I text my parents. I'm like, hey, I don't really think I'm going to go get my PhD. I think I'm going to start my own business, and I want to train athletes, right? Which is interesting because as I look back on it, it's like I didn't do an internship, right? Like I didn't do an internship like I feel like most people that in the strength and conditioning realm do. I just was like, I'm so obsessed. I'm gonna just like, go with it. And basically I got connected with some people that I had known from going to the gym, and uh I was able to start training out of this really cool facility. It was actually a guy who um basically just turned this old warehouse into a gym, and he also liked training people and had made money doing a couple other things, and he was just like, I like personal training people, I'm turning in the gym. We got connected. Things are going well. I think my business is about to blow up, and I have a good friend that talks me into moving from Tampa, Florida, back to Bettendorf, and here we are ever since. And I don't know how I did it or how he did it, talked me into moving back, but here we are, and I'm glad he did.
Not gonna lie, I mean, Florida has its own like pros and cons, right? But you're like, yeah, I'm going to leave Florida where there's no winter and then come back to a place that there's a lot of winter.
Oh, yeah. Like I
He
mean, I
must
was
have been
waking up.
very persuasive.
Yeah. I mean, I was waking up. I'll never forget. Like I tell people, story. I was waking up at 5 a.m. Right. I was waking up 5 a.m. to coach, which I thought at the time was like the craziest thing in the world. Right. I'm waking up at 5 a.m. to the one of the football teams I trained on there at the time was 5:30, whatever. And I tell a story that like I never once waking up that early, I ever had to wear like sweatpants and sweatshirt at the same time. It was like I might wear a sweatshirt and shorts, or I might wear sweatpants, but like I really didn't have to if I didn't want it. It's like, no,
Right.
I'm wearing like t-shirt shorts. Like this is awesome.
I remember when I moved down to New Orleans, I made it like a video of me walking to work in flip flops and socks and shorts in the middle of December. And my friends from Iowa were like, please stop. This is making us mad. I'm like, sorry, I love it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like I like it's something like you obviously know about the weather, but like you're like, wait, so I only have to wear shorts and t-shirt all day. So now I have half as much laundry as I do when it's in the
Yep.
winter, and I need to be wearing a coat, pants, sweatshirt. Yeah,
Bundled up. So very
yeah,
interesting because you said that when you started, you had no interest in coaching athletes one on one. And now that's really what you do. You coach athletes majority of the time, but then you sprinkle in some PAT. So fast forward, like you said, now that you're in Iowa, and how was that transition for you to like, yeah, you did some high school coaching, but really like engulf yourself in your business, in doing some personal training, how you even changed from like where you started till now with your programming. Um, yeah.
so yeah, so basically I like I said, I just became I became obsessed, right? And I think the one thing that I think the number one thing is like I tell people all the time, right? And you can't fake this, like I truly care, right? Like I still this day like truly care. Like if you know me, I'm going to like 3 or 4 sporting events a week. Like my Friday nights right now are spent going to football games, right? And it's like because I truly want to see my athletes perform, right? It's like I always tell people, it'd be like if a doctor performed surgery, but they like never knew if their like patient was okay, right? Like imagine doing a surgery and you don't know if your patient survived, right? Like you like want to know that. So for me, I work with these kids, you know, hopefully year round or a couple months at a time. You want to actually see them perform their sport, right? Um, and so that was, I think, like the number one thing that I kind of knew that I could succeed because like I truly, like I said, it was like I might not have been the smartest, I might not have had the greatest background in terms of like getting going. Um, but I think that was the one thing that like helped me succeed. And so like the thing that I always laugh about, and it's like, you go onto Twitter and you can have every strength coach debate whatsoever. But like I think for me, like I grew up in the bodybuilding background and the strength background, right? So I obviously like the thing that came really easy to me was like the strength portion, right? Like the lifting side, like I knew I knew I could get athletes like bigger, bigger and stronger, right? Like, but that's only like one piece of the pie, right? So I think one thing for me that has been so not like hard, but like it's like almost uncomfortable to like test your philosophy and stuff is like, okay, the speed aspect, the sprints, the plyometrics, like how that fits into a program. Because like I look back at my old programs, right? And like my kids were getting results and they were getting faster, but it's like, yeah, because I'm working with kids that they haven't done, they haven't done anything, right? They've never lifted weight before. They've never done any plyometry like that, right? So I think that's something that, like I look back on my old programs and I'm like so hard on myself. I'm like, this is actually terrible, right? Like I'm like, this is actually terrible. And at the time I'm like, this is the perfect program, right? Like, and as you know, like the perfect program doesn't exist, but back then I'm
Yeah.
like, this is the greatest thing on paper. And
Yep.
I just look back, I'm like, this is awful, right? But at the time it was what I thought was the best of, my knowledge. And, I still go back to that and like you do kind of like pat yourself on the back. You're like, okay, I think this program's horrible. But then I get some of my college athletes programs from like their current day, like, like D3 or NAIA program, and you're like, this is garbage, right? You're like, my kids don't need to be doing 12 sets of buys and tries supersetted with 12 sets of, chess, right? And that's their workout for the day. And you're like, what? But
Yeah.
I think that's been the thing for me is like, like I'm willing to admit in everything um like what my weaknesses were. And I think that's the kind of thing is I just knew like that's the part that I was always going to struggle with. I was always going to have, like the lifting side or the strength portion. That was going to be easy for me. So to challenge myself to figure out, okay, where does the true speed, where's the true agility work? Where does that fit into a program? How do I program that? That was like what was like hard. And I still this day is probably what I struggle the most. But I think it's also because you compare people that are, like that's their specialty, right? Like,
Right.
and I don't even mean like I don't, it's like specialty means is like there's just always going to be something that is what your bias is or what you're a little bit better in, right? And it's like I have
Yeah.
a good friend, I have a good friend Ben who I think is like a genius when it comes to speed stuff, right? And it's like I think
Is
there's
that the
people
strong
like
by
that.
science guy?
So this is no, so this is actually his name's Ben Hildebrandt. So it's Small Town Speed is the name of him. Um, but it's just like I see him and I'm like, dude, this guy is a genius when it comes to speed, right? Like he just knows, and he's good in all sports performance. But I'm like, it's like for me, it's like, and I'm not like saying this, but like probably for me, and I'm sure Ben would be like, if Ben were probably be like, oh, I want an athlete to get bigger or stronger, he'd probably be like, oh, Chase is probably that's a little bit more of his like specialty, which again, like we can both do speed and we can both do strength, right? But they're always gonna have something that you're probably a little bit better at. And so that's what I think is always like my challenge, right? Is like I feel like when I'm doing any research or that kind of stuff, it's like towards the speed aspect, right? Or that kind of stuff, because that's just what you're
Yeah.
not good at. um, and I mean that's with I think there's everyone's going to have that, and so if you really want to be good, you got to deep dive into some of those weaknesses, basically.
That's a really good point. A lot of times too, when I was in, so Chase and I both went to UNI, but at different times. And Jed Smith, the strength coach there, would he always he said numerous times like, if you think your programming's the best programming, you better check yourself before you wreck yourself. And it's just so funny. But knowing your weaknesses, because everybody like not like saying everybody has like certain biases, but some people might, people who have like fully engulfed themselves into agility or like use strength. And then it's nice that you have that like feedback. Cause I feel like a lot of times coaches don't want to talk to each other because they have that thing like, I have the best programming or I know it all. And it's like, well, maybe you focus on agility, I focus on strength. And then therefore we can like mesh back and forth. But it's smart that you do that. I feel like athletics have come a long way, especially in high school. Oh my gosh, I remember we had our weight room was on our stage, like our performing arts stage, and they would have the weights up there. And I remember watching my AD lift weights, and I just am so curious. I walked in, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I just don't understand what you're doing as a junior. And now, high schools, some of them, I mean, it depends on money, but are decked out and have like super awesome weight rooms and, are getting introduced to strength and conditioning a lot more. But I feel like your programming and just from watching the kids that you really have a well-rounded program, and that's what makes your programming like really really special. But then on top of that, something that you cannot really install in people is caring, is actually like in your soul caring about your kids and you showing up to their games and like outside and taking your time. It helps them want to buy in more because they see that you actually care, and it's not just them coming in and getting their workout in. Like they're not just a number. And that goes with anything. So that's what makes you like really special. And the interaction that you have with your kids, you actually care, and you're helping them not only be stronger like in the gym and sport, but also, like I said earlier in the introduction, in life.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like you said, it's like one of the things. It's like you don't want to say like, oh, you can't fake it, right? Like I care so much, right? And it's like, but like I think it's one of those things when you are so passionate, right? Like it's just like hard to not like I always say it's like if you what's the saying? It's like if you're like great, it's like if you're great, you'll tell everyone. Or if you're good, you'll tell everyone. If you're great, people will tell you, right? And it's like, so I'm not trying to be like, oh, I care so much, but I just think it's one of those things that like for anyone like in the space that like you have to realize like that you could be the greatest coach in the world, but like if you don't care, like you're never going to be as good as you could be, right?
Right.
Like I use for example, like it sounds crazy, and it's like you learn like like big back in the day, it's like, oh, you could say like, oh, you can prevent injuries if you do this strength and conditioning program. It's like, dude, injuries are so random, right? But like if you don't, as a coach, like when your athlete gets injured, like if you don't, like I say this a little bit, it's like I've told parents all the time, I go, I see kids get injured and I immediately think, what could I have done differently? Right. Like there's a part of me that like, you're like, obviously your heart hurts for these kids or whatever, but there's a little bit like that always goes back to, and it's like, it's like I've had some kids, like I had a kid I trained forever. Right. And, um, like I used, for example, he had been begging me to go to his game, right? And like there's certain injuries like you really cannot, like he broke his, like he broke his fibula in a football game. Then begging me to go, he broke his fibula in a football game. You're like, okay, yeah, that's just like a freak injury, right?
Yeah.
But then like there's other injuries like, like a bad like ankle sprain or ACL or like any of this stuff. You're like, okay, what could I have done differently? Is this something that I have changed? And I think if you do have that feeling, right, it just shows like that even if you're not where you want to be, right? Because like I still this day, like I, think that I have so much learning, can get so much better. But I tell people it's like if you have that right there, like if you go back and you reevaluate, or you can like look in the mirror and say, I messed up, right? If you can do that, and like you're gonna be such a better coach because you sit there and realize like, okay, like yeah, it might not have an effect, but just the fact to be able to go back and reflect on your training or what you've done, like I think that just shows that like there's an element of like I said, it's like a respect to your athletes, right? Or respect to your clients. If you're sitting there being like, okay, like, because I think it's really easy to you. I mean, we've all been to a gym that's like someone gets injured and it's like, oh, it's their fault or whatever, right? And you're like,
Yep.
yeah, but like what were you doing? Like, were you loading too much? Was were you bogging this person down with a ridiculous amount of volume? And so they just couldn't handle a lot. You know what I mean? I just think it's one of those things that like if you can sit back and be like, okay, what do I need to change, or what could I have done differently? I just think that goes such a long, it just goes so far. And in the end, if you have that mentality and you really have it, like you're going to be great at, like, I mean, literally anything you do. Right. Um, but I tell all the young kids, I'm like, dude, if this is something you truly care about and you truly enjoy helping people, like, I'm like, that's something that like you can't teach, right? You can learn all the X's and O's, right? I was like, but I can't teach you to care about something, right? You know?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head, and just reiterating like what we said earlier is you it's not saying that you have to like devote your entire life to this, but it's really perfecting your craft and doing like a self-assessment, and you're like, okay, if it's monthly, weekly, whatever works for you, and like, okay, is my programming good? This person got hurt, what could I have changed here? I don't think that's a bad thing, because it makes it very interesting when you are that coach in programming. Okay, maybe this individual did really well, but like you said, maybe it was too high a volume for them, so they're going to do less reps. Injuries are going to happen, and we want to prevent them as literally as much as possible. Like injury prevention, safety is the safest thing, is a huge forefront of like strength and conditioning programming and coaching on the floor, because if your person gets hurt, they're not going to be coming back. And not saying that they won't come back, but they're going to be out for a little bit, nursing that injury out of their sport. And while injury do happen, you're trying to prevent them as much as possible. And that's where you can be really hard on yourself, or saying like, hey, like, can I tweak this for them? Can I tweak that for them? And that's why I like coaching group classes. I really try to help people understand like this is a workout for the entire gym. And if we need to tweak it for you, that's what we need to do. So you're not, pushing yourself too much or too much load or going too heavy. You're doing things that your body can handle so that you can have a better outcome. Or, if you do get injured, right? that the strength and all the conditioning and training that you've done can help you bounce back from that recovery. Or they show up and you're like, okay, these are things that we can do. Because the thing that you do that, a lot of people don't do, but I feel like even in any certification that you have, they're making people do CEUs, like actually continuing their education. But that's what you do. You're like always honing your craft, you're doing research, you're looking at what people say, taking it into like your own context, not doing exactly what they say, but you're like, okay, that's a good idea, or I need to do this, or maybe this agility will work better, and continuing perfecting that. And I feel like that's a like testament of where you're at today. Like, I mean, I came in later to the picture, but seeing your kids grow, like you have a lot more kids than when I first started there. It looked like you had a lot of kids too, and not saying you didn't because you're in a very small area, right?
Yeah.
But now looking at your kids, like your class times that you have in the afternoon are full. Kids are having their parents like tell other parents, hey, my kid's getting a really good outcome from here. You're turning out really good college athletes, no matter what level they go to. It doesn't matter if it's D1, whatever. They made a college, they are on a college athletic team and they do really well. So it's just a testament of all that. But then they want to come back when they're on their college break. They want to tell you about their things. They want to celebrate those wins. And it's just something that when you can inspire people to like be healthy and not, also just like and smart about their training for the longevity, it's such an awesome thing that you can do that so young for kids in high school and help them enjoy it and not help them like hate fitness or grinding them into the ground or doing more CrossFit stuff. You're like helping them understand how to lift and work out properly so that when they do go on their own, they're like less likely to get hurt as well too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Like you actually said one of my like favorite things that like I've been experiencing lately um is like I get kids that I train for say, X number of years or whatever, right? And one of my favorite things is like I get kids that, are very good athletes that just like they're like, I don't want to play sport anymore, right? I just want to enjoy my college experience, right? And I think like one of the coolest things is like I'll get a text and be like, hey, like, can you write me workouts for like I'm not playing sports anymore, like I just want to get jacked, right? Like that is honestly like kind of like one of the coolest feelings because you're sitting there being like, okay, you love fitness, you've come to realize that that's just something you do, right? Like you just enjoy it. And it's cool to know that like they trust me enough that like they want me, you know what I mean? Like they trust me enough to write this up or whatever. Or it's like, and even it's like some kids like it's some kids too is like, right, they go and they try to navigate on their stuff on their own, right? And it just like doesn't work out or they don't really like this or that type of thing. And it is cool to know that like they trust me to come back to be like, hey, I tried this, I didn't really like it, like I want you to write up something for me now, right? So like
Right.
that's a cool feeling. Because like I said, like I tell parents all the time, like, yes, like athletics is our goal. We want to improve as athletes or whatever, right? But like one of the biggest things that I tell parents, because you know, every parent wants their kid to come 4 or 5 days a week right away. And I'm like, no, like two, right? Like 2, 3, like, okay, you're getting really serious. Like maybe we'll go 4, right? But like for me is like, I want your son or daughter to love working out, right? Or even if they don't love working out, they like it enough that they keep coming back or they see the value in it like long term, right? It's like
Yep.
that is my number one goal because the reality is if they like it and they love it, that's how you're going to get really good results because they're going to buy in, right? Like and
Right.
so that's my number one thing is like yeah, the athletics are awesome and it's great and yes, I have those athletes that they hate working out but they know it's going to help them reach a goal, right? But just as much as that athletic performance, just like getting kids to love working out and be comfortable and knowing what to do is like is for me is like just as cool like probably like long term because like right like like I have kids like that they train with me, like I have a kid that graduated, I have a couple kids that graduated last year, that started training with me in 7th grade, right? They trained me in 7th grade and now they're off at college, playing their sport. But I have a kid that graduated before. He started probably similar time, 7th grade or whatever. And it's like he was phenomenal athlete, right? Like he could have gone Division 1 a couple sports. Was just like, you know what? I'm done with sports. But like he loves working out now, right? And you just look at it like athletics is just such a small portion of your adult life that you're like, okay, like what is it going to be when sports are over, right? And I think that's cool that like, like right now it's just like to see that effect on have kids, or just like willingness to work out or see the importance of it is really cool. And it's something I honestly never even like thought about, right? And like when I first started, because like I didn't have any kids like that, but then you have these kids that you become like your little brothers or sisters, and then it's like they're asking you for fitness advice, so much later on in life.
Yeah. Speaking of fitness, right? I gave you the topic about talking about your own fitness in general and how you've transitioned, because you've really embraced this hybrid training, really putting out a lot of content on your social media platform, mainly Instagram. From what I see, probably TikTok, but I'm not a TikToker. So how has your fitness evolved over the years? And if you don't want to talk about over the years, it's great, but it's like, how has your fitness evolved now to incorporate a lot more running that you weren't really doing before, but now just really are enjoying?
So yeah. So like, as you know, I'm like, this is something I'm like super jacked up about. Like I'm like passionate about like all fitness, but like this is something that gets me like super jacked up right now, just because I've like seen what it has done for my like for myself, right? And that's obviously where people get like passionate about stuff in fitness, is like, oh, you got to try this or whatever. Um, but so for the longest time is I only cared about like, I just want to build as much muscle as possible, right? I just like, I didn't really care about strength, right? Like that was a byproduct of me wanting to, building muscle, was I was getting stronger and that kind of stuff. And so I did that forever. And I mean, like I would say it was probably about as consistent as you're gonna find like a college kid that was like in terms of weight room, because like fitness wasn't, as you know, fitness wasn't big when we were in college, right? Like it's very, very mainstream now. But so probably from the time I was, say, I graduated high school, say 18 to probably, I don't know, 20, we'll say 25, right? It was just hypertrophy, right? Like bodybuilding, that kind of stuff. Like when I started coaching, I got into a little bit more of like stuff that was going to have my athletes do. But for the most part, it's like I only cared about like how I looked, right, and like the bodybuilding side. And just because I just was never been like, I just have not been like a strength person. Well, the last like, I would say probably, we'll say last like 5 years, right? As you know, like, in a lot of people trying to get into our industry like don't realize this, like I've worked out less probably the last 5 years than I ever have in my entire life, because it's just like you spend all day in the gym, right? So it's like there's some, I mean, it's hard to like truly get motivated when you're like, okay, I'm at work. Do I work out at work? Do I go somewhere else? Like that's like something. And basically, so this, like, so that's what I've been doing for the longest time. And yes, I've dabbled with everything in between, right? Like I've dabbled with the CrossFit side, the Olympic lifting side, like I've done all that. Well, this is probably said the first time I've been like really like passionate about like my own personal fitness, right? And I'm not even like training for anything, but I would say it all started like this summer. Like you said, I have really like embraced kind of like the hybrid training, and hybrid can mean so many things for so many people. For me, like when I say hybrid, I'm talking um lifting, right? Like I still want to look, like I still want to look like I work out. I still want to be jacked. I still want to be, strong enough. Um, but then I like got into like the running, right? Like, and for me, like, like hybrid, so lifting, running, right? And, some people are, they're more of like the Ironman side, but they want to be, or triathlete, but they want to be jacked, or they're more of like, the biking and jacked. But for me, it's like hybrid was like, I want to be a decent runner and I want to look jacked still, right? Like, um, which is like obviously counterintuitive to like anything you've ever been taught in school and
Right.
fitness and whatnot. Um, and so it all started basically this summer. This is gonna make me sound so old right now, but I purely started running for the health benefits, right? I was like, I'm doing zero cardio. I'm like, I need to do something, right? So I started off as like, I started doing 30 minutes. As my goal was 30 minutes. I think it was, I can't remember if I started like, I think it was twice a week, 30 minutes twice a week, right? And I'm like, okay. Then I was like, okay, this is like terrible, but I'm getting better at it. And so then I went from 30 minutes to like, all right, I'm going to go twice a week. I'm going to go 3 days a week, right? Well, then those 3 days a week, I got super busy with like like moving the new gym. And then those 3 days a week turned into like, oh, instead of doing 3 days, I'm actually going to go for twice, but I'm going to go 45 minutes. Right. And like,
Mm-hmm.
it was purely from a health standpoint, right? Like I didn't change up any of my like strength training, right? It all stayed exactly the same. Like I just like dealt with like, okay, like, I just kind of placed my workouts. I should say my workouts were set in stone. I placed my running. Well, that kind of turned into like, you know, my sister's like, hey, do the Bix with me, which is, like a 7 mile road race in town. And then I like kind of got into, I'm like, oh, I'm like really enjoying this, right? And
Yeah.
more so for me is like I'm so much an enjoyment person, but like I feel really good, right? I feel really good, and then like I'm like this is awesome, right? And I'm not even like yeah, I'm like for me I'm able to eat more, so I'm like okay, if I look the
Yeah.
same and I'm eating more, like this is a win-win or whatever, right? And then I like started like getting into I'm like I'm not even being like smart with my training, right? Like I'm just doing it because I'm lifting and I'm going to run because I enjoy it, right? um, and like getting leisure. And then I start thinking to myself, I'm like, I'm supposed to be losing muscle here, right? Like I'm supposed to be losing muscle here, right? Like, and I'm not, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm like, yeah, I'm like losing some body weight, but like I never felt like, oh, I'm losing muscle. And then I'm in the gym and I'm like, oh, I actually feel stronger today. And I went for a 5 mile run yesterday. Like, how is that making sense, right? And you start to dive into like, yes, if you're gonna be like a high level like professional bodybuilder, like yeah, running is probably not the best thing for you, right? Like there's other modalities to get your aerobic work in, right? But like for me, I'm like, dude, I'm not trying to be like I just want to look good, right? And I think it's one of those things where like all these light bulbs start going off where you're like, wait, so I actually can run. I can run. It's going to improve my, like my aerobic capacity, my aerobic base, my aerobic health, whatever, words you, cardiovascular health. And then I'm sitting there, I'm like, but not only is it not affecting my like strength training, I'm actually feeling better and stronger with this, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it was just like my mind is just like being blown, right? And my mind is just being blown. And I think the thing that is just like so funny for someone who's like so entrenched in the fitness scene, right? But like I would say I'm like entrenched in the fitness scene, but I've never been a really big like mindless scroller on social media. Like I have social media because of my business, and I've like really leaned into content recently, and I've been loving it. But like I've never been like really entrenched in like the whole like social media like fitness game, especially like as I've gotten older. Like I mean, in college it was like the coolest thing, but like, and I started getting all these people that ask me like, do you follow so and so? Like, do you do this? Like, blah blah blah. Like, oh, you're doing hybrid training. Like, do you follow Nick Bear or whatever? And and I'm like, who are you talking about,
Right. Who
right?
are
Which
you
is like,
talking about?
and like, I come
But it's one
upon
of those
thinking
things
I'm
when you're
like,
so focused and not saying like selfishly, but when you're so focused on like what you're doing and engulfed in it and not getting caught in the scroll of doom, you're not aware
yeah,
that like, what other people are doing. Not saying that you can't get advice from them, but it's like you're getting your research from other places,
yeah,
especially like what you're doing. And it's too, it's like you felt good. Like what you were
yeah,
doing, you felt good. And it
yeah,
does go against what we've been told in school. Like you got to pick. You're gonna either gonna lift or you're gonna cardio, and you shouldn't really do both because you're gonna lose weight in cardio, and you're gonna build mass and muscle with lifting. But what a lot of people don't understand is like you can change your mass, like the
yeah,
mass on your body. And if you're not really doing strength training while you're trying to lose a lot of weight, there's a good chance that you're going to lose more muscle than you want to, and not lose it, but it's going to really shrink down that your muscle mass is not as much as you want it to be. But
yeah,
then when you figure out that you can incorporate running and lifting, and not in the same day, you're not running 5 miles and then coming in and doing like a 2 hour workout. That's like way
yeah,
too much. You're running one day. That's your workout for the day. That's your
yeah,
movement running. And then the next day, because you're eating more too, you're giving your body time to recover. You can come into the gym and crush it because you're not,
yeah,
hurting from the day before because you lifted a lot and you like did a lot of hypertrophy and then you continue to do it.
yeah,
So it's cool for people who want the best of both worlds, understanding what you said, like you don't need to work out every day. And I know sometimes it's your outlet, it's your therapy, it's, that mental thing, but changing that workout to maybe 4 days a week, you do some running or walking or have a little bit of different fitness modalities versus like grinding your gears 7 days a week
Yeah.
and not really resting, especially
Yeah.
as you age. Not even once
Yeah.
they get older, but just as your
Yeah.
body ages.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, it's just like, and like kind of what I was saying is like, it was kind of mind blowing. So I'm like, I started asking these people and I'm like, I like this Nick Bear dude, and he's like one of the big names or whatever. And I use him for example, but like, I like people keep asking me like, "Oh, you're doing this program?" And I'm like, "No, like I'm just been." And then I like finally like it was like the third person. Like I remember someone like a year and a half ago said like, "Oh, this I'm doing so and so's training or whatever," and I was like, "I don't even know who that is." Like, there's a million fitness people out there, like whatever. And then I think I'm like onto something like so mind blowing, right? And I'm like, "Oh, this is actually a thing, right?" Like, and like Nick Bear, right? And it's like this is a thing. Like he's made this thing was like a quote unquote strength athlete, and now he's like crazy and running. But like that is that aside from something that like I think is like so cool with this whole like hybrid thing is like, yeah, there's like all these people, but like a lot of people are like, it's like newer, right? So it's like you're kind of figuring stuff out as you go,
Yep.
right? And I think that is like what's so fun is like I think like like I was telling Austin today, it was like it's like I'm sitting here trying this. I was like, I'm not, I'm not telling someone that like I'm gonna, you know, coach them for a bodybuilding show or a powerlifting show, or I'm not gonna get you to run some like crazy marathon or whatever, right? Like that's not me. I just want to show you that like you can be a runner, right? And like look jacked, like like more like a like a bodybuilder, right? Or like a strength athlete. And like the same goes, like you can be a strength athlete and also be a good runner, right? So I think that's something that like is so cool. And like I said, it's like the shiny object syndrome. It's like one of those things that's like, okay, this is cool and new. But for me, I've started to realize you're like, okay, as I'm older, I'm just not going to be one that's going to crush my body with like tons of volume. And that's not to say is like
And newsflash, he still makes the games.
yes,
Holy shit,
exactly.
people, listen up. And he gets to
Exactly.
eat
And
more food.
yeah, and that's like the thing I like people this is here I'll go on another tangent here, right? And I could talk all day, right? Like okay, like people get into like, oh, you shouldn't, food, blah blah blah. Guess what? I enjoy food, right? And I think it is perfectly okay to enjoy food, right? And I'm sitting here and like, dude, if you like, I think like the thing that if you just switch your mentality, be like, I'm gonna feel my body, right? To feel good for my workouts, right? Like it just takes on a totally different meaning, right? And
Mindset is the whole thing. Yep.
and I think like a lot of people, it comes down to you're just more efficient, right? And it's like with this, like I said, with this aerobic base, like you're more efficient. Not only are you don't necessarily have to, maybe you're still resting as long, but like your rest is more meaningful. And, and like you can get into so much of the science behind why it does the work. But I just think it's so cool because you're just like, it's one of those things that's like was so taboo, even 5 years ago or 3 years ago,
Yep.
whatever it was. And now it's becoming like a thing to be like, oh, I mean, it's kind of even along the lines of like what, like CrossFit is like, it's a little bit more extreme, a little bit different, but it's like, oh, like you actually can, I remember when CrossFit first came out, it's like, oh, so these people look like a bodybuilder, but then they can run marathons and blah, blah. And it's like, yeah, well, there's a little extra help there and that kind of stuff too. But it did open up so many, I think, personal trainers' eyes and strength coaches' eyes to be like, oh, you actually can do both, right? Like, and I think that's like kind of what I'm here for is like, you don't have to pick, right? And this is like my other big thing with fitness. Like, you don't have to pick and only be like that one-headed monster, right? Like, you can, like, if you want to go for a run, go for a run. If you want to go do yoga, right? Like, and
If
there's
you
a way
want to
you can,
play pickleball. It's the
yes,
new craze.
and that's like the thing that like that's thing like I'm actually like even more so passionate about like when it comes to just like movement. It's like that's the one thing like too is like I think I grew up like, and we grew up in like a time where it's like, oh, you're trying to put on muscle, like, you probably shouldn't go play basketball in the rec center. And you just like, and you're like, to me, that's like such a like psychotic way to think. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, I promise you, it's not gonna affect the way that you build muscle, right?
No.
Like, you might have to
No.
again go back to eat
But
more.
if you scare people and use a scare tactic,
Yeah,
then they're going to rely on you because they need that more information about all that.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. But no, it's like something like I could talk. I mean, I could go on forever because it's like it's very new to me, but I'm also like learning that I'm like, okay, this is what I was missing because like I just don't like there's just days where I'm not gonna be personally, like mentally, I'm just not gonna be able to go and like max out on something, right? I would love that to be the case, right? I would love that to be the case, right? And I hope like my schedule gets to the point where like I can still, when I really want to crush it, I can crush it. And I still do, right? Like, but I think this has been a way to be like, dude, if you're not feeling, if you don't have the mental capacity because you have a busy work day or you're doing this or doing that, like it's okay to be like, you know what? Just go for a run. Okay. And I would challenge anyone to go for like me, I mean, me personally, right? Like I could go to the gym for a half hour or 45 minutes I mean, this is just me. I would not feel like I got to go work at it, right? Like it's just how I'm wired, right? Like because I I like to rest a lot, right? I like to rest a lot. I like to, kind of push the intensity on my lifts. So like I need that extra rest. But like if I'm only going in there for a half hour, like I'm maybe getting 3 exercises done, right? Which might seem crazy for people, but that's just like how I am, right? Like if I'm not going to superset stuff, I'm not going to get a ton done. But like I could have a half hour before I need to go, like back to work or go be somewhere. I can go out for a half hour run and I'm going to be like, you know what? I got a great workout, right? And like, and it's, yeah, like there's a lot of factors, it's like, oh, that's the runner's high or, this or whatever. But like a 30-minute, jog or even a 30-minute walk, like is so beneficial in so many ways to everyone out there that I think that's the kind of thing that it can kind of like low key get addicting for someone. I feel like in our world that you find, I used to be so into working out and I had so much free time to do that. And I just don't have that free time anymore. Right.
No.
Like,
And you
um,
have to change due to the free time that you have. You're like, okay, I'm going to change my
yeah,
schedule. I'm going to change my mindset, not feeling lifted today. I'm going to run today and then I'm going to lift tomorrow because
yeah,
I might feel better tomorrow. But today I don't feel great. So even if you have a membership at the gym, and you don't want to run outside, you could go to the gym and run. Like,
yeah,
there's ways that you can still like have your cake and eat it too,
yeah,
but not think that you have to do something just because it's like, that's what is scheduled today. Change it.
yeah, exactly.
What
Exactly.
is
And
3 things that you want to leave the audience with? Because we're definitely going to have Chase back on. I want to dive into there's not a lot of talk, there is, but there's not a lot of talk about programming and number schemes and all that because that's what he does. And I think it's very important for people to understand why the number and rep ranges are actually there. But what is 3 things that you want to leave the audience with?
3 things. I already touched on one is have fun, right? Just have fun with whatever you're doing in life, right? For one, like I just have fun, have fun with your fitness. Number two, is going to be stay consistent, right? Like I think that is the number one tool in anything in life, but like really fitness, right? Like I can tell you, like I'm not, I've never done the optimal program. I've tried to do the optimal program, but I wasn't. And I just stayed consistent though, right? Stay consistent. And number three, and this is one that I will say is like a more of a new thing for me, is like do stuff that makes you uncomfortable, right? Like I'm gonna be 100% honest. Like I like running, but I stare at my shoes for at least 10 minutes every day before I go and run. And it's like, but it used to be 20 minutes, right? Like, and I think it's one of those things where you do stuff that's uncomfortable. You just real like, I just think it helps, like, not to be like, oh, I'm a big motivational guy, but like, I just think it helps so many aspects of life. But I think when you do that uncomfortable stuff, like, it makes everything else so much easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's cliche, but those are my three. So have fun, stay consistent, and do some stuff that makes you uncomfortable.
I think those are 3 really good ingredients to a awesome recipe that, you need to have fun in life. You need to be consistent. And I know that's such, a very like loaded statement, but just being consistent for like at least for like 3 months, whatever you're doing, like you need to be consistent to really reap the benefits of the outcome, and then do things that challenge you, get uncomfortable. If you're really comfortable and you're just kind of in that hybrid state and just kind of going through the motions, you can start to not like it. So, keeping yourself on your toes and, trusting yourself, being happy, doing some things that are uncomfortable, trying something new, especially as we, grow old and age, we can just get very complacent. So, thank you, Chase, so much for coming on to the podcast. Appreciate your time, and hopefully, if you are still with us, you enjoyed what we have to say. And if you did, share it on the social medias. I will link Chase in my social media below. If you want to give us a follow, if you want to share, please tag us in it. This is not paid. We do it for fun. We're just trying to get information out there, and just really appreciate your help. So thank you all.
All right, thanks, guys.